Demonstrators in Vietnam hold an anti-China rally, despite recent talks about a sea dispute. Accusing China of wanting to invade, protesters in Hanoi chant "Down with China." The Asian neighbours are locked in a long-standing dispute over territories in the South China Sea, which flared up again recently. These Vietnamese demonstrators, numbering about 100, marched to the Chinese embassy amid tight security. They accuse Beijing of laying claim to the scattered Spratly and Paracel Islands and of intimidating surrounding countries who dispute their sovereignty. For the first time since the protests began 5 weeks ago, demonstrators issued a manifesto against China, accusing Beijing of provocation.
Every inch of Vietnam's territory must be protected and respected. We will fight any enemy. It's as simple as that.
Other governments from Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines and Taiwan are also involved in long-standing maritime disputes with rival claims over small islands. China's claim, though, is by far the largest. Simon Hanna, Reuters.
300 Vietnamese march on the Chinese embassy in Hanoi in reaction to a dispute over territorial waters. Both Vietnam and the Philippines claim their ships have been harassed along a part of the South China Sea, believed to hold oil and gas reserves. 3 Chinese boats intentionally cut the cables of a Vietnamese ship last month, Hanoi says.
China's action is immoral, and it's not something such a powerful nation should do. Vietnam wants a friendly relationship with China, but will not tolerate China's disrespectful, invasive and bullying attitude.
A similar protest in 2007 brought hundreds of angry Vietnamese to the streets. Offering reassurances during a regional security conference in Singapore, China said the situation is stable. During the 10th annual Shangri-La Dialogue, which ends Sunday, Vietnam also resolved to work toward a peaceful solution. But Vietnam's deputy defense minister took a more direct line, telling reporters the country would do anything to protect itself.
The consistent, unwavering position of our party and state is that we will try. We will use all means to protect our national sovereignty.
China claims the lion's share of South China Sea territories, but Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan also have stakes along the important shipping route. Lindsay Parietti, Reuters.
Vietnamese authorities allow a second day of anti-China demonstrations over a recent territory clash in the South China Sea. Protests like these seldom happen and are often immediately suppressed by police in communist Vietnam.
Vietnamese authorities have allowed a second anti-China protest over a territory dispute in the South China Sea. On Sunday, nearly 200 demonstrators assembled outside the Chinese embassy in Hanoi. The protesters chanted "Down with China" and carried banners with Vietnamese slogans reading, "The Spratlys and Paracels belong to Vietnam," referring to the archipelagos in the South China Sea.
We, the 85 million people of Vietnam, protest strongly against China's invasive actions on our territorial waters and the killing of our fishermen. The Vietnamese people are willing to sacrifice everything and do anything within our power to protect our sacred territorial water and land.
The protesters marched through the streets of Hanoi, with police stopping traffic to allow them to move about.
It is so very obvious that China has taken bolder actions, and it seems they are doing so to challenge us.
Public protest like this is rare in communist Vietnam, but authorities are clearly supporting it. The latest protest occurs just one day before the Vietnamese Navy holds live fire exercises in the South China Sea. China and Vietnam have clashed in recent weeks over ongoing maritime disputes in the South China Sea. Vietnamese authorities complained about 2 incidents of Chinese ships stopping Vietnamese vessels from carrying out oil and gas exploration in the South China Sea. The South China Sea is along the major international shipping route and is believed to hold huge oil and gas reserves. Although a military confrontation is unlikely, tensions between the 2 countries could affect regional diplomacy. According to a Chinese state-run media editorial, the Chinese regime warns Vietnam not to provoke its much bigger neighbor.
protesters gathered outside the Chinese embassy in Hanoi for a fourth consecutive Sunday over an ongoing dispute regarding islands in the South China Sea. The Spratly and Paracel Islands are known to be rich in oil and gas. Public demonstrations in Communist Vietnam are rare, however this has the support of authorities. Police mingled with the crowd and directed the protesters to move along. The protesters sang wartime patriotic songs and chanted "Protect Vietnamese people" and "Down with invasive China." Some of them carried Vietnamese flags and posters with Vietnamese slogans as they marched along peacefully. One protester says the demonstration reflects the mind and will of the Vietnamese people. I can see that Hanoians are very concerned at a time like this, a time when China is continuously and aggressively expanding in the South China Sea, a time when the international community urges China to respect the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was signed in 1982. For others, peace was all that was on their mind.
The message we're trying to get out today is just like all the other times. We urge China to keep peace on East Sea, the South China Sea, and stay true to the agreements they had signed with Vietnam and other neighboring countries.
On Sunday, Vietnamese and Chinese authorities pledged to resolve the dispute through peaceful negotiations. Tensions between the two communist neighbours have escalated over the past month because of their long-lasting sea dispute. Both countries have responded with naval exercises, but analysts are saying neither is keen to provoke a military confrontation.